Good morning, everyone. I want to thank everyone for attending today. We are so excited to continue our work with the Friday Institute this semester. And you all have already delved into Unit 1 and starting to learn a lot of stuff. So we are excited to have Shayla back with us. I know many of you were introduced to her at the CF Institute this past summer. And so she will be with us throughout this semester, and we will be definitely learning from her and very excited about this partnership. Also, your principals are going to be similar. So we are also excited in the fact that we're doing some work with the Friday Institute where you and your principals are getting a lot of the same information, which is so important for consistency. So I'm going to turn it over to Shayla now, and let's engage in this wonderful work on remote learning.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, for those of you just jumping in, my name is Shayla Rexroad. I'm really excited to be with you this morning. If you have not already shared your name and the school that you're with in the chat, we hope that you'll do that. That is as much for me and my colleague Blake as it is for you all. I know normally we would love to be in person doing this professional learning, but not having that opportunity. This is a great way for us just to kind of get to be familiar with some of your names, because we are going to be together for the next couple of months throughout this amazing learning series as we really jump in and explore remote learning, understanding through the asynchronous learning, what is just some key learnings? What are some things that are really instrumental that we bring into the remote learning environment for our students to be successful? And then allowing these synchronous sessions to focus a little bit more on the coaching element of how can you be a really supportive coach, but also a guiding coach for your teachers throughout this really interesting and unique time in education. So again, if you have not already accessed the slides, I'm going to drop it one more time into the chat. You will want to have access to these throughout the session today. I am recording this session, so if you are a learner that you really prefer to just be able to kind of sit back, really absorb the learning and not worry about vigorously taking down a lot of notes, just know the recording will be there for you to go back and grab later. I will also put the slides into the place in module 1 this afternoon once I have the recordings ready as well. So you have the slides now, but if for whatever reason you mislocate them or you don't save them, you will be able to access them through the place moving forward. For those of you who I did not meet during the Institute last month, again, as mentioned, my name is Shayla Rexroad. I am with the Friday Institute, and I truly consider myself to be your learning partner, as does Blake Wiggs, my partner in crime, who is on, but he's kind of silent behind the scenes helping me out right now. You will have an opportunity to be fully introduced to Blake with Module 2, which we will talk about at the end. But we really, as we sat down and started to brainstorm and think about this work, we very quickly realized we are learning as much as you are. But what we did try to do, and what we hope that we will bring within the modules as well as throughout the Synchronous series, is that we really went back and started to draw upon best practices and research. What are things that we know that over time have proven to be really beneficial when teaching students, regardless of the environment, regardless of the situation that they're in, but also starting to think about how might some of these strategies look and feel and sound a little different in a remote learning environment. So that's what we're really going to dive into today, is thinking about what is it that we're bringing to the remote learning environment that's really great? What are the things that maybe we're bringing or our teachers are bringing that could unconsciously be hindering our abilities to really provide equitable learning spaces for our students? And then lastly, how do you start to really serve as an effective coach for your teachers? I do not doubt you are already doing an amazing job, but I think we're all in a place that there is certainly learning to happen, and we hope that today will open up those doors for you. If you are not familiar with the Friday Institute, really quickly, we are part of the NC State family. We are located on Centennial Campus, which is kind of the back end of NC State. And we like to say at the Friday Institute, this is where policy, practice, and research come together. Our particular team, the Professional Learning and Leading Collaborative, we focus extensively on developing, designing, and really delivering professional learning to educators. We have worked with educational leaders in the past, classroom teachers, and a lot of our work has really focused on coaches. I will go ahead and share, just for terminology's sake, I recognize that a lot of you have different titles within your schools. Not all of you may have the official word coach in your title, but for our purposes today, I'm going to be referencing and referring to all of you as coaches more in the context of you're in a support capacity. You are in a position where you have the opportunity to maybe influence or impact the teachers that you're supporting. So again, it is not to be disrespectful or to not recognize that you have different titles, but really we're taking the perspective of how do you serve as in a way that you are helping and guiding teachers through remote learning, regardless of the title that you might have. So this was something that hopefully you had an opportunity to read and see as part of kind of the pre-work section in the place, which is where we really talked about being an engaged learner. And I am really quickly going to drop the link for the slides just because I see a couple of folks are just jumping in and I want to make sure you have access to the slides. So I just put that in the chat window. But also want to draw us back to this idea of being an engaged learner. And these principles that are listed below, they come from Jim Knight. We're actually going to talk a little bit more about some of the work that Jim Knight has done in the realm of coaching as we move through this learning series. But as soon as I saw these partnership principles, and again, when I was reminded of them when he recently spoke at a virtual conference for ASCD, I went, yes, this is what conversations, this is what dialogue, this is what interactions should be, not only in a remote learning environment, but all the time, but especially in a remote learning environment. How can we truly be engaged in the learning process? And this is a question we get a lot from teachers right now with remote learning. How do I know when my students are engaged? Some of them, they don't even turn on their cameras. Some of them, their camera's on, but I can't really tell if they're engaged. But again, it kind of goes back to establishing norms. It's helping students to also understand what it means to be an engaged learner. And for you as a coach, it's helping your teachers to really understand how can they also be an engaged learner. But for our purposes today, we want you to be an engaged learner. So again, your ability to practice it will only help you in guiding and modeling for other folks. So as we think about being an engaged learner, it really is first and foremost about equality. We will absolutely address equity in just a few minutes, but for being an engaged learner for this purpose, it's about equality. It's everybody feeling that they have an equal role in the conversation. We are going to be participating in quite a few breakouts, so you are going to have opportunities to share and have dialogue with your colleagues. But we also hope that those are spaces where everybody feels like that their opinions, their ideas, and their experiences are welcomed and that you are all equals in the process. Excuse me. We also hope that you will be willing to hear what others have to say. We recognize that some of you are middle school, some of you are high school, some of you, every one of your schools probably looks and feels very different right now. The teachers that you're working with are very different. So again, we want you to be very open to hearing what others have to say, because although it may not be a direct scenario or situation that you can relate to, you might have advice or have resources that could help that person. Choice, that people have a lot of autonomy. Again, this idea of dialogue, that conversations should be back and forth. When you go into these breakouts, I hope that you're having that really rich dialogue. Reflection. There are going to be multiple opportunities throughout this session that I'm going to ask you just to sit and privately reflect. That could be a situation where I'm asking you to kind of think back to things, totally live in the moment, but also at times to reflect, well, what could be next? And how might this learning impact your role as a coach moving forward? Really absolutely recognizing the praxis, the learning in action. We are all learning together right now. I am not an expert in remote learning. Blake is not an expert in remote learning, but what we do hope to be able to bring to this conversation is some guidance and some resources that will help you to go back and really have powerful dialogue and conversations with your teachers. And conversations should be life-giving. And we hope that all of the conversations that you have, all of the learning that happens today, as well as those with your teachers, that you are helping someone to be able to grow in their profession and to ultimately feel really good about the work that they're doing every day. All right. So we're going to start with this activity called personal baggage. And the reason that I opted to start with this activity, there are several different great activities that come out of the Office of Intercultural Affairs at Stonehill College. I've utilized several of them. Those of you who joined the reflection activity, you had an opportunity to participate in one of those, the activity just by looking at me. But for this particular one, I specifically chose it because it was something that was recently brought to my attention by a colleague. And it's this idea of baggage. And when we think about baggage, these are things that we bring with us, experiences, things that have happened that regardless of whether or not we want to bring it with it, it is a part of who we are. And in some way, shape, or form, it impacts our actions. It impacts how we may interact with individuals. Again, some of it is very conscious and some of it is happening unconsciously, that you are not aware that you're doing it. But a big part of being an effective coach is first stopping to recognize and really evaluate what is some of that baggage that you're bringing into the remote learning coaching role, whether there are things that you reflect back on from the spring experiences you had, or even prior to that. You might be a brand new coach this year. Like you literally started this role in August. So it's what baggage are you bringing with you from your own experiences, maybe with a prior coach, or experiences just as a classroom teacher or working with other teachers. So really stopping to reflect on our personal baggage, but also being willing to recognize not all of our baggage may be positive, and that's okay. Again, it is how we choose to look at that baggage and how we choose to let it influence and impact our actions is what's really important as we dive into this idea of remote learning. So to give you an idea of what I'm going to ask you to do, I've provided kind of an example on the screen. So if you have a sheet of paper nearby, if you would just draw 4 to 6 boxes, you can also, if you don't want to do boxes, you can number 1 to 6. If you're working solely off of your device, if you want to open a separate notes window or a screen and just number 1 to 6, you can do it that way as well. But in just a minute, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to fill in 4 to 6 pieces of baggage that you feel like you really bring to the role as a coach. Again, positive or negative. 2 that I reflected on because I actually put myself through all the activities that I ask you to do. What I very quickly realized that I bring to the coaching role is I feel like I'm a really great problem solver. I have the ability to listen to a situation and then kind of reverse engineer it, really break it down to the granular pieces to really figure out what's the root cause, what is really causing the problem, and then how do we start to resolve things from there. So that's something very positive that I think that I bring. Something that I feel like I have to really be cautious of and I have to constantly catch myself on is this idea of bringing confirmation bias to a conversation. Oftentimes when someone reaches out to me and says, hey, I want to talk to you about this, I go ahead and start formulating responses. I kind of come into a situation already thinking about how I'm going to help to solve it. So again, this is being a problem solver that isn't always the best approach. So bringing that confirmation bias, sometimes I don't always listen openly to everything that everyone's sharing because I've already started to create what I think the outcome should be and how I'm going to go about leading them down that path. So again, things that I know that I bring that I have to be very cautious of, but they also help me to reflect and be a better coach. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to be quiet for about a minute to between a minute and 2 minutes. And I just want you to take a couple of minutes to jot down what baggage do you bring to the remote learning coaching role today? So I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to let you write. All right, I'm going to draw your attention back to the screen. Hopefully it gave you time to fill in a couple of the boxes, if not all of them. But again, I always find that this is a really good activity to constantly kind of come back and reflect and think about, what am I able to bring to the coaching role, but also what are things or areas that I know that I still have a lot of room to grow. And that allows me to be that active, engaged learner in the process. So what we're going to do now is we are actually going to go into our first breakout session. But for the breakout session, I want you to first take the opportunity to introduce yourself. You will be with this same group throughout the session, so you'll keep coming back together. So just take a quick minute to introduce yourself. If you do not already have your camera on, if you are willing and comfortable to at least allow your group members to see your glowing faces for the breakout, that would be great. Again, if that is not a comfort level for you, just explain that to your group. When you do go into the breakouts, it should automatically take you off of unmute and you should be able to talk. If for whatever reason it doesn't, if you just scroll along the bottom of your screen, you'll see your little unmute button. If you just click on that, it should open you up to be able to talk and share. But in your breakout groups, again, share, introduce yourselves, but then depending on your comfort level, share one piece of personal baggage that you bring to the coaching role. Again, thinking about how it influences or impacts how you coach, but also starting to think about, well, how do you coach? How would you describe how you coach? And how does this personal baggage that you bring with you, what impact or influence does it have? So in just a minute, if you are not familiar with breakouts in the Zoom, just a second. In just a minute, you are going to see a screen appear or a little window appear on your screen. It will ask you to join a breakout group. So I am setting them up right now. There should be 3 to 4 people in each group. So that should give each of you about a minute to be able to share before I will bring you back. When there's about a minute left, you will see another prompt appear on your screen letting you know that in a minute you will need to rejoin. If you'll just click the button to rejoin, it'll bring you back into our whole group session. So again, I hope you enjoy the breakout and you should see your message appear right about now. All right, welcome back. We still have about 30 seconds, so some folks are still finishing up in their breakout. So I'm gonna give them some time to rejoin, and then we will pick back up with the session. All right, welcome back. We have about 15 seconds, and then everybody should be back with us. All right. Hopefully everyone is back with us. Hopefully you had an opportunity to introduce yourselves, get to know your small group. If for whatever reason you did not join your breakout this session, I do hope that you will be encouraged to join it for the next round, because the breakouts are going to be really instrumental in our learning together today and really providing you that opportunity to talk through things and to be able to talk about a couple things. I do apologize for the delay on Zoom's in. It took it just a second in order to push out the breakouts, but I appreciate some of you letting me know it hadn't happened yet. So hopefully we will not have that moving forward. All right. So again, as we continue to stop and think about this idea of personal baggage, I now want to stop and put it in the perspective of the teachers that you're supporting. So you've thought about your own baggage, but now let's really stop and reflect. What personal baggage are your teachers potentially bringing to remote learning? It could be baggage from things that happened in the spring. Again, positive and negative. Are they still bringing that baggage with them into their remote learning experiences this school term? It could even be things prior to remote learning last year. But again, we all have it. We all have things that have happened to us in our personal and professional lives that we carry with us. But again, it's stopping to recognize, reflecting on the fact that, all right, I know when I go into every coaching situation, personal baggage is going to be there. But how do I help someone effectively work through that personal baggage and either really utilize those positive experiences to continue to help them to grow professionally, or if they're negative experiences, all right, what can we do to help them work through those negative experiences so that we can maybe create more positive experiences that they can bring into the teaching and learning environment every day. Also thinking about how their personal baggage might be impacting their ability to teach right now. Hopefully you had an opportunity to do the pre-work or the Activate Your Thinking for Module 1, where you watched the video by Brene Brown, where she talked about blame. That is one piece of baggage that a lot of individuals are bringing into remote learning right now. A lot of people want to resort to placing blame on everything that's happening right now in our entire across the United States, actually across the world. We very quickly want to resort to blame. But in that video, she also talks about that's a piece of personal baggage. That's something that we can choose to bring it with us and have it impact and really have a positive influence, or it's something that we can bring with us that can have a very negative influence. So again, starting to think about what is the personal baggage that your teachers are bringing that you could fill in those boxes for. But also, I want you to stop and think about how you would describe your coaching style. And this is going to be really instrumental as we continue on through this session, as well as through the entire learning series. It's constantly stopping and reflecting and asking yourself, how would I describe how I coach? How would I articulate to my principal, to another teacher, to anybody that might approach me and say, well, what exactly is it that you do? But more importantly, how do you do it? How would you describe what it is that you're doing? And how much of that personal baggage actually influences, impacts how you coach right now, specifically in remote learning. And then we kind of want to have this overarching question that's going to continue to permeate throughout this entire learning series over the course of the next couple of months. And it's really this big question: are the teachers you support providing equitable learning opportunities for all students in remote learning? And is this idea of equitable, not equal, which is ironically what we're seeing a lot of right now, not specifically just in Guilford County, but across all the work that we do. We're seeing a lot of equal opportunity learning happening, but we're not necessarily always seeing a focus on this idea of equitable learning for all students. Again, if we're not seeing that happen, why? Could it be because of baggage that is being brought into the remote learning environment? And how do we start to really navigate the baggage that we are being presented with? So that brings me back to wanting to create this common language around equity, because equity is really going to be something that we hone in and focus on a lot throughout our synchronous sessions as well as throughout our modules. But remembering that equity is empathy in action. And this was shared in the reflective session that I did during the CF retreat. But again, just want to kind of draw your attention back to it, because it's really a critical part of the work that we do every single day in our classrooms, either remote or in person. But I also wanted to share this definition. This was actually shared with me from my colleague Blake, who is also helping me design and develop and deliver some of this instruction. And it comes from this great book called Coaching for Equity. If you're not familiar with it, it is absolutely one I would recommend that you add to your list of things that you might want to pull from or reflect from. Elena Aguilar, she just does a great job of framing things in a way that makes sense. And here is how she defines equity. Every child gets what they need in our schools, regardless of where they come from, what they look like, who their parents are, what their temperament is, or what they show up knowing or not knowing. Every child gets what he, she, or they need every day in order to have all the skills and tools to pursue whatever they want after leaving our schools, to live a fulfilling life. Equity is about outcomes and experiences for every child every day. And there's that idea of experiences again. Again, recognizing our experiences are powerful. They influence and impact what we do right now and the outcomes that we will receive in the future. So again, it's stopping to really recognize in a remote learning environment, how are we creating those equitable opportunities for our students, despite the home environment that they might be working from, despite the parents who send the messages every day who say, I'm sorry, we just couldn't get to this yesterday. Or I'm sorry, my child has to go and stay with a friend all day. We don't get to sit down and do their schoolwork until at night. So a lot of their assignments are going to be late. It's for some of the students that you might have coming into your schools or logging into remote learning, they are having to help younger siblings all day with their remote learning. So again, it's being able to look at all the baggage that our students also bring to remote learning and being able to stop and recognize that baggage, respect the baggage, but also allow the baggage to help inform our work moving forward and not create it in a negative space where we feel like we can't provide every student with equitable opportunities. This is a great quote that I always come back to. I actually have it hanging up by my desk at the Friday Institute, and now I have it virtually displaying in my home office. But coaching is unlocking a person's potential to maximize their own performance. It is helping them to learn rather than teaching them. And I kind of want to put this quote up there. We're going to come back to it again, but really stopping again to reflect on how are you currently coaching in a remote learning environment? Are you finding yourself doing a lot of teaching with the teachers that you support, or are you really helping them to learn how to do it based on the experiences and based on the students and the needs of their students? Again, there's a very big difference. So again, for our work throughout this synchronous session, it's really focusing on how do we help them to learn rather than be the ones that are teaching them all the time and telling them how to do things in a remote learning environment. Regardless of what the teachers may be asking for, which I do not doubt a lot of them are asking you right now, just tell me how to do it. Give me a checklist, give me a sample lesson, join the class and tell me what I'm doing wrong. This is a very natural way that teachers are going to resort to an uncomfortable or different situation. But again, what you choose to do right now as a coach is going to be so critical, not only to their success in remote learning, but their success following remote learning as things start to evolve back to our face-to-face environments. So in order to help you really stop to reflect on personal baggage, as well as the information that was covered in Module 1, I want to present you with a scenario. This particular scenario, I do not give a specific content area or grade level. Again, just imagine it could be any teacher, any grade level, middle school or high school. but it's focusing on Mrs. Rexroad. And what you find is that after several weeks of remote learning, which is where we are now, and following a series of professional learning offerings, Mrs. Rexroad continues to provide lecture-based instruction. After observing some of her remote lessons, you decide to schedule time for one-on-one coaching. When you ask how things are going with remote learning, she shares that she didn't sign up to teach during a pandemic and that she is doing the best she can. She shares that several of her students still don't have reliable internet. Many are showing up late to class and they just don't seem engaged. She doesn't think her students are set up for success, and neither is she. The students just don't seem to care. Again, this potentially is a scenario or parts of the scenario that you can relate to, that you may have teachers that are actually experiencing or thinking and going through some of this right now with remote learning. But what I would like for you to do right now is just on your own, jot down some ideas of how would you potentially approach this teacher during this one-on-one session, and what would you start to do in order to coach them. Again, recognizing at the end of the day, it's all about the students and making sure that they are receiving what they need, but supporting the teacher throughout the process so that they feel successful with remote learning. So I'm going to be quiet for about a minute and a half, and I'm just going to let you jot down some notes of how would you potentially coach this teacher. All right, I'm going to go ahead and draw your attention back to the screen. Again, this is an opportunity just for you to start jotting down some ideas of how you would potentially coach Mrs. Rexroad. But now what I do is give you an opportunity to go back into your breakout groups. If you are new to your breakout group, if you didn't join last time, just quickly introduce yourself. I'm probably going to give you about 5 minutes because I was able to put you in a little bit of some smaller groups. But I just want you to openly talk about how would you potentially coach this teacher. Again, remembering our principles of being very open to hearing how different people would approach things, having open dialogue, having conversation. So I hope that those spaces will open up with the breakouts. But in just a minute, hopefully Zoom will push these out a little bit faster for me this time. So again, I apologize last time for the lag. But in just a minute, you should see the prompt appear for you to join your room. Take a couple minutes to talk about how you would coach this teacher based on your experiences thus far. All right, welcome back. We'll give folks a couple more seconds. Some are still finishing up in their breakout groups. Right, some people are starting to come back in. All right. I think everybody should be back with us now. So, again, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the opportunity just to kind of have some dialogue. I did see where one or two of you, other folks in your group, didn't join. So, if that happens, if you just let me know, I'll try to reassign you to another group as quickly as possible. But again, I hope those of you who are choosing not to join the breakout groups that maybe you will be more willing to join moving forward. Again, just to continue to have that dialogue and those open conversations with your colleagues. So again, as we continue to think about this idea of how we can effectively coach and support teachers given different scenarios that they're in, one of the things that I want to draw upon is the work of Jim Knight. And again, early on, we shared his principles, which he's going to talk a little bit about in this video that we're about to watch. But he also really talks about 3 different types of ways that we can interact with educators as instructional coaches. And I don't know how familiar some of you might be with Jim Knight. I know some in the elementary session made reference to his impact cycle, which he's going to talk to you a little bit about in this video. But Jim is really well known. He's been around for years. But he actually recently spoke at the ASCD virtual conference. And so I joined his keynote session, and that's when it was kind of that reminder of, yes, this is what should be happening right now for our teachers in remote learning. So again, the work that he's talking about here is not specific just to remote learning, but there's so much that we can draw from it to be able to assist and help us through the coaching work in remote learning to really set us up to not be one type of coach versus another, but to really be able to understand the needs of the teacher and really serve as a partner and as a learning partner with them along the way. So I am going to play the video. As you watch the video, I want you to reflect back on the question I asked you earlier. How would you describe your coaching style? We are going to come back to the scenarios again, so hold tight with those ideas. But as you reflect on how you would present yourself as a coach right now, or articulate how you would be a coach, as Jim Knight talks about the 3 types of approaches, facilitative, dialogical, and directive, is there one that you are finding yourself more drawn to right now as a remote learning coach? Are you seeing it's maybe 1 or 2, or do you really feel like you're a blend of all 3 given the situation? So just kind of a personal reflection as you listen to the video. I am quickly going to check and make sure that I have my computer sound turned on. If for whatever reason you do not hear him whenever I press play, if you would just let me know in the chat, but hopefully the audio should be working, and we hope you enjoy the video. Oh, there we go.
I want to talk a bit about what instructional coaching is, the essentially principles that are behind the work and the process that we do when we do instructional coaching. And I want to distinguish instructional coaching from other approaches to coaching. First thing I want to talk about is what we mean by instructional coaching and how it's similar or different from other approaches. And usually when you talk about coaching, it's put into 2 different boxes: facilitative coaching or directive coaching. Facilitative coaching, growth coaching from Australia, and cognitive coaching from the United States would all probably be forms of facilitative coaching. And facilitative coaches work from the assumption that the person they're working with already knows what they need to do. But through the coaching process, through questions, through listening, through mediating the thinking of the partner in the coaching process, the person realizes what they want to work on, they set a goal, and then they plan out how they're going to hit the goal working with the coach. The metaphor for facilitative coaching is a sounding board. I don't share ideas, I don't share expertise, I don't share knowledge, but I do facilitate your thinking through the way I ask questions and listen and work with you. The other kind of coaching is directive coaching, and usually when you hear people talk about coaching, it's either facilitative or directive. In directive coaching, The idea is, the assumption is the teacher doesn't know a particular teaching practice they need to learn, and my job is to make sure the teacher learns it. And I work from the assumption that they're going to have to get it, and I'm going to have to describe it and follow up and make sure they do it the right way. The metaphor for the facilitative approach is a sounding board. The metaphor for the directive approach is an expert with an apprentice. And the assumption, again, in the facilitative approach is the teacher already knows what to do, and the teacher is doing the decision making. But in the directive approach, the assumption is the teacher doesn't know what to do, and the decision maker is the coach. So often people, when they hear about coaching, they put it in one box or the other box, but I think there's a third way, and the third way is what I call dialogical coaching. Now, in dialogical coaching, the assumption is that often teachers do know what they need to work on, but sometimes it's helpful to have a person, an expert in instructional practices, who can help you learn new things to meet your goal. Billions of dollars has been spent studying what effective instruction looks like. And to have a person, a coach, a partner who positions you as the decision maker nevertheless to help you learn practices to hit your goal seems to make a lot of sense. This is not directive coaching though, it's dialogical coaching, because in dialogical coaching the teacher remains the decision maker. And as I describe practices as a dialogical coach, I always say, do you want to do it this way? Do you want to modify it? Is this the practice you want to do? I don't give advice. I don't show up like an expert, but I have expertise to share with my partner, the professional. Which gets to the second thing, which is our approach with teachers. When we do dialogical coaching, instructional coaching, we position the teacher as a partner, which is to say we position the teacher as the person who's in control of what happens in his or her classroom. They are the decision makers. And we have a set of principles we work from: equality, choice, voice, dialogue, reflection, praxis, reciprocity. If you want, you can see a video on each of those principles plus an overview video at radicallearners.com, and just go there and poke around on the blog and you'll see them. But the core idea of the partnership approach is I honor the autonomy of the professional with whom I'm working. I see them as important or more important than me. And in some ways, I see coaching as an act of service and support to the teacher. I never push my perspective, but if I have a chance to share something of value, I do. And I also don't silence myself. I might say, well, here's what I'm thinking about this. Would you like to hear it? But I don't say, you have to do this, or this is my advice. I just say, let me give you another point of view. It's a back and forth dialogue. And when we use that process in coaching, well, there's a step-by-step approach we take, and we call it the impact cycle. We identify, we learn, we improve. During identify, first thing we identify is a clear picture of current reality. We might do that through video, through interviewing kids, through looking at student work, through observing the class and sharing data. Once we've got a clear picture of current reality, then we set a goal. And the coach has a set of questions, a little bit like solution-focused coaching, if people are familiar with that, where we say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how close was this class to your ideal? Why do you give yourself that number? What would have to change to move it forward? What's a strategy you want to use to try to hit the goal, and so forth. And we help the teachers set what we call a peer's goal: powerful, easy to achieve, emotionally compelling, reachable, which is we can measure it, we have a strategy, and student focus. Then once we've got the goal, we help the teacher learn the new strategy. So that might involve describing it clearly with a checklist, allowing the teacher a course, and encouraging the teacher to modify it to make it fit her classroom, and then modeling it by either going in the classroom or watching a video or going to see another teacher try it out, but see it before we do it. And then in the improvement stage, teacher implements this new strategy to try to hit a goal, and usually they have to make modifications, change the strategy, change the way they teach the strategy, change the goal, change the way they measure the progress towards the goal, something like that. Now, we've done 20 years of research on this. If you go to instructionalcoaching.com/research, you can have a look at the studies we've done, many of them peer-reviewed. And if you want, on instructionalcoaching.com, there are tons of forms, well over 100, dozens of videos. And if you can download it, you can share it. We don't want you to sell it, but we want to put it in people's hands so they can use it.
All right, so I'm going to stop the video there. Hopefully you were able to kind of get the gist of the 3 approaches to coaching that Jim Knight kind of talks through. And here is a chart on the screen that kind of summarizes how he was breaking down the metaphors and the characteristics of being a facilitative, dialogical, and a directive coach. One of the things that I've seen a lot happening right now in the coaches that I've been talking with, as well as teachers, is that they are finding that a lot of their emphasis is more on the directive right now. Even though they historically may have been more facilitative, they're really finding themselves in a very directive approach because, again, remote learning is so unknown to every educator right now, and it has been since the spring. So they're really coming to you possibly as a coach as the expert. They're looking for you to tell them how to teach remotely, or in some situations they're saying, give me a template, give me a checklist, give me something, tell me how I know whenever my students are engaged. How do I possibly teach 90 minutes of instruction in a 45-minute Zoom session? How do I ensure that my students are logging in and staying engaged? There's all these different dynamics that are happening right now. So much baggage that our students are bringing with them every single day that is impacting teachers' capacities to feel like they are truly having an impact. But this is where your role as a dialogical coach can become really instrumental. And some of the things I jotted down as he was speaking that really resonated for me is this idea of a dialogical coach. The teacher remains the expert. And I recognize that right now, a lot of your teachers don't feel like they're experts. They're like, but I'm not an expert in remote learning. I need somebody to tell me. But what they are experts in is instructional approaches to teaching. And they need to be reminded of that. But how you start to remind them through that is this dialogical approach, having the open conversations and avoiding going in with the, well, if it were me, I would do this. Or if it was me working with this student, I would do this. Really taking yourself out of the equation. The other thing I really love that he shared is that the teacher is way more important than you as the coach. And just remembering that, again, as you're thinking about how you're approaching coaching as a remote learning coach. Again, we recognize it looks and feels and sounds very different right now than how it may have looked traditionally when you were coaching in person in your building. As he mentioned, and even for myself, whenever I was going through coaching training, when I was in the classroom and a lead teacher, it leaned very heavily towards the facilitative approach. It was me going in and kind of saying things that I identified that I saw that they were doing that we might want to work on. Again, that can still happen, but right now with remote learning, a lot of your teachers are going to depend on this dialogical approach in order to continue to feel successful. So now I want you to think back to that scenario. I'm going to put the scenario back up in just a minute with Mrs. Rexroad, but I want you to think back on that scenario and really think about what would a facilitative interaction potentially look like? What would a dialogical interaction look like? And what would a directive interaction look like? This is just going to be your own personal reflection, just jotting down some notes. If there's one in particular that you really want to focus in on, please go ahead and do that. Or if you want to think about all three, really do what you need to do in order to help yourself start to think about your own coaching style and how you would potentially start to move in one direction versus another with this particular teacher. So here is the scenario again. I'm going to be quiet for about a minute just to let you reflect and think about each of the interaction approaches. All right, I'm going to bring your attention back to the screen. You are going to have another opportunity in just a few minutes to go back into your breakout groups where you can hopefully talk a little bit more about these approaches. But what I also want to do right now is I'm going to hold off on the next breakout because I actually want to build you up with another resource and something else that I would like for you to have time to talk about in your breakout. And it is this idea of developing probing questions. One of the things that Blake and I really hope that we will bring to all of these sessions is that we will equip you with knowledge. We will equip you with information, best practices, things that we know historically have worked really well and can apply to remote learning. But then we also want to provide you with specific resources or tools that will help to guide you in moving in that direction. If dialogical coaching is relatively new to you, or if it is not an area that you really felt like the past couple of months that you've been able to live in, it can take some time in order to develop those types of questions that you might position to a teacher when you go into that dialogical conversation. Because as you could tell from what Jim Knight talked about, it's all about the questions. It's what types of questions are you presenting that allows them to draw upon those experiences, to unpack some of the bad baggage and let it go, to revisit some of the really great baggage and to bring it back into their teaching right now. But it's all about the dialogue that you have with them. And that comes from developing probing questions. So if you do have your slides open, if you would click on the link right here for developing probing questions, I am also going to drop it into the chat window. So if it's easier for you to access it from the chat, I think it's a 1 page, maybe page and a half document. And this document is not from Jim Knight, but it is a resource that was shared that just aligns so well with what he was talking about being a dialogical coach and how we present questions to our teachers. So what I want to do is I'm not going to read the article to you. I'm not going to try to break it down because it does a great job of explaining itself in the article. I'm going to give you about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes. I just want you to take a minute to read through the article. And if you are feeling compelled in the chat to share one key takeaway, something that kind of jumps out at you that might be a reminder of something, it might be something that you're already doing, or it could be a new learning that you're like, ooh, I've never thought about that before. So feel free to populate those into the chat. So I'm going to give you time to read and I'm going to be quiet. Enjoy the article. Right. Hopefully, everyone had time to get through the document. I am seeing some great responses in the chat window. Love the idea of having truly curious questions to be able to be vulnerable and to let your teachers recognize that you are not experts in everything that you do. You are not an expert in remote learning, but to really have those questions that leave maybe both of you going, curious about that. Let's unpack it together. Let's really start to think about it. Because again, it is oftentimes where we go into a coaching situation with our own agenda ahead of time. We have that, that bias of, well, this is what I'm going in and this is what I need the outcome to be. And this is how I'm going to go about having the conversation versus really going into that conversation, just maybe with a couple of probing questions in mind, but really allowing that open dialogue to start to happen. So please continue to populate your responses in the chat. They are really great. But again, it is about baby steps, not pushing to that danger zone. And we know those teachers that very quickly can get into the danger zone and they will shut down. But again, it's how you approach them through those probing questions. But what I want to do now is I want to give you an opportunity to start to develop some probing questions that you can actually use with some of the teachers that you're supporting in remote learning. So what you are going to do right now is I'm going to put you back into your breakout groups. So if you have not been joining the breakout groups, I strongly encourage you to jump in and join for this particular portion because I've created a Padlet. When you open the Padlet, you are going to see where the elementary group earlier this morning, they started to populate. I chose to keep the same one because I think the same questions are applicable regardless of the grade band that you might be supporting, or you may just have to tweak or adapt one. But when you open the Padlet, you are going to see that there are 3 columns. And this is a space for your group to start to develop a series of probing questions that would support that teacher who is struggling with remote learning. We have them. We know who they are, or you might be suspecting that they are struggling with remote learning. You also have those that they're just taking it one day at a time. They're like, you know what? Just let me get through today. I can't think about tomorrow. I've got to let yesterday go. I've just got to live in the moment. I'm going to do this. I'm good. But then you have those that are really excelling. They're like, man, I love remote learning. This is great. It's what I think I've always wanted. It's a space that I'm really comfortable in. They're doing a bang up job. But again, it doesn't mean that they don't still need coaching. There are elements and aspects to every one of these teachers that throughout remote learning, they are going to need you as a coach. So this is your opportunity in your group to be able to continue to populate some of those questions. So you have this artifact, you have this space to go back to start to pull some of those questions that can be specifically used with remote learning. So I'm going to drop the link to the Padlet in the chat. It's also accessible through the slides. So if you want to go ahead and open it, because we do have a larger group, I would ask that maybe one person from your group be the designated, like I'll go out and add the questions as we're populating them. The questions that are on the sheet that you just read, you can absolutely still use those. You might just decide to tweak or alter them a little bit. It is whatever works best for your group and what are questions that you would potentially use to create that dialogical coaching environment. So again, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes in your breakout group. I am going to go back out and set up your breakout groups again. Oh, if I could get out of my screen, there we go. So in just a minute, you should see the prompt appear. Again, I strongly encourage you to join your breakout group if you haven't thus far. That way people have a couple of different voices and opinions to hear from. So I hope you will take advantage of that. If you did not join the very first breakout, be patient with me. I need to assign you to a breakout, but it'll take me just a couple seconds to get that done. So right now you should see the prompt appear, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. All right. Some of you may have already rejoined. We're going to give folks a little bit more time. They have about 30 seconds. Some are still finishing up. All right. Welcome back. We got about 20 seconds and then all the rooms should be back in the session. So we're going to give folks a couple more seconds. All right. Yeah. Right. So welcome back to the session. I have to tell you, Blake and I, like we were having a conversation while you guys were in your breakouts. We were looking at the questions being populated in the Padlet and just absolutely are loving some of these questions. Like I'm actually like, ooh, I'm going to use that one next time I'm talking to a teacher. Some really great ones. I love the one about really isolating one portion of their frustration and helping them through probing questions to really work through one thing at a time, because you have probably experienced it where if you just walk in and go, how is it going? Wow, it's like a floodgate that comes at you. And then it just becomes either a great session, it becomes this overwhelming session where you don't know where to go back and start. So I really love how you've designed questions, but that help to get them very focused, helps them to come back to this idea of, okay, how are we equitably teaching all of our students? How are we creating these great environments? But I love that you are really allowing them to unpack the situations themselves with you there as a partner in the process. So these are great questions. If you haven't had a chance to go through and continue to read all of these, they are great. Hopefully we kind of hit the gamut, the spectrum of the different types of teachers that you might have in your building. But I would also encourage you to continue to come back to this and continue to add questions. Blake and I were actually talking, we're like, all right, probing questions, like this is going to keep coming back. It is something that you will see that we revisit regularly throughout this entire learning series, because we recognize the power of probing questions and how effectively they can really open up that dialogical interaction with teachers. So again, we hope that you will continue to draw from the probing questions document as well as from the Padlet where your colleagues shared. All right, so we are nearing the end of our session. So what I wanted to do to kind of wrap things up is to give you an idea of where we are going moving forward. Again, today was only the beginning of really starting to first identify your own baggage, the baggage of your teachers, how that is impacting the remote learning experience for your students. But more importantly, how do we start to have really open dialogue with teachers through those probing questions that will allow them to revisit the things that they are really great at, but to also recognize the baggage or the things that they may be bringing to the situation that could be contributing to some of their frustrations. But also for them to recognize they are experts and they have the capacity to change and engage their students in lots of different ways. So module 1 was all about thinking about how the learning happens. How does the brain work? How does it process information? What do we know about a student's capacity to be engaged in a remote learning environment? How do we start to think about that engagement in an asynchronous and synchronous environment? And then as a coach, how do you continue to build upon that? How do you help them to start to understand some of this great information that you've now obtained? Module 2 will be your next module that will launch on Monday. So when you go back into the place, you'll log back in the same way you have for module 1, you will see module 2 appear. Same type of structure with the discussion forums that we hope you will take advantage of. But this one is going to start to look specifically at lessons. And you're going to be examining effective lessons for maximum learning to happen. Again, thinking about that equitable learning, but how are teachers utilizing the resources that they have at their disposal? How are they utilizing them to really create those equitable learning spaces? How are we drawing upon things like the technology frameworks that we know exist? How are we bringing those back into the equation and using them again to have those dialogical conversations with our teachers? Module 3 will come in mid-October, and that one is going to be diving into and taking a look at personalization for equitable learning, but what can personalization look like in a remote learning environment? How do you start to ensure that teachers aren't forgetting about the powerful role of personalization and what it can look like and how to start providing it? A lot of this we hope will start to happen prior to this session in this module, but this will be just further reinforcement and tools and resources for you. And then the last module will talk about assessment and feedback. How do you know when learning's actually happening? Recognizing the assessment process, all of that is taking a very different form with remote learning. What can feedback look like, but also for you as a coach, how can you continue to provide really powerful feedback to your teachers? So all of the asynchronous instruction is going to be supported by our synchronous sessions, where you have an opportunity to really unpack and talk as coaches about what's happening in your buildings. So again, we hope that you will continue to join the synchronous sessions. The next synchronous session will be October 7th. So from Monday until October 7th, you will have to complete module 2. In order for you to receive your certificate at the conclusion of this entire learning series, you will need to participate in the discussion forums within the asynchronous portions. You will also need to complete the surveys, and we will also ask you to submit your action plan template. If you are not sure where the action plan template, if you go back into the place, it is part of the pre-work section. I think it's on the introduction page, but we will also make sure that we post it again in module 2 for anyone who may have overlooked it or doesn't have it. But that action plan is really going to serve as a reflection document for you throughout this learning series. So those are the things that we're going to be looking for the conclusion of the learning series that some of you have been asking about. I am, as we conclude, just going to draw your attention back to this quote. I told you I would bring it back up again. And it is this idea of really, again, focusing on helping them to learn rather than teaching them. And hopefully now that you've heard a little bit more from Jim Knight, you've started to dive into probing questions, this idea of helping them to learn rather than teaching them is becoming very realistic. It's all right, now I have the tools and the resources. I have that reminder that I knew was there. I just needed to revisit it. I needed to maybe approach coaching from a different perspective with some of the teachers who are maybe still struggling or who have just said, I didn't sign up for this. I don't know if I'm going to make it. What can we do to support them as instructional coaches? So what's up next? As I mentioned, module 2, that will launch on Monday. You'll get a quick follow-up email just letting you know it's there. And we hope that you continue to enjoy the asynchronous learning as well as the synchronous time together. And lastly, before you log off, we hope that you will take a couple of minutes to fill out an evaluation on this particular session. This is different from the asynchronous. This is specific to our time today. I am going to drop the link into the chat, but if you do have the slides open, the link in the slides should work. Let me go ahead and drop this in. And again, thank you so much for the time. Thank you so much for what you do every single day. Thank you for being the support infrastructure that your teachers need right now. And we hope that you enjoyed the session, and we look forward to reconnecting with you in October. So again, when you finish up with the evaluation, you can carry on with your day, and we hope it's a great day. Thank you so much. And if anybody has trouble with the evaluation, please let me know. But again, I dropped the link into the chat, as well as you should be able to access it from the slides. And the last thing I'll say is, again, I am recording this. The recording and a link to the slides will be available back in module 1 in the place. Hopefully this afternoon. Sometimes it takes a little while for the recording to render. If not today, you should be able to see it out there tomorrow. So if there's something that you want to go back and review, look at, or if you had colleagues that couldn't join today, you can let them know that that will be available for them to go back and reference. Thanks, everyone.